we don't always have to change our mindset. That's not always what this is about. Sometimes we just need to add something else in and accept that, of course, we've got challenges going on. Of course, we sometimes have negative thoughts, or maybe a lot of the time. We all have those Elton John presidencies in our head. And we don't necessarily want to take that away because that is part of it. And also, we can't take it away necessarily. But what we can do is we can add a little bit more of something else, i.e. positivity. And it's not that we need to shoot ahead of positivity, that toxic or over the top. It's just that we just need to get our balance in sometimes so we can feel better and perform better and connect with others better as well. Hello and welcome to Psychology in the Wild, the podcast where we try to make sense of the everyday chaos and wildness of life. I'm Dr. Gemma Lee Roberts.
And I'm Erin Shrimpton.
Erin, what's been wild this week?
Well, this week I have a very positively wild, if that's a possibility, update. I had my brother's wedding and it was absolutely fabulous in every way. And I'll tell you something that was particularly wild about it because it was here in Ireland, in a beautiful part of the country on a lake, Lough Ree, in Athlone, in the centre of Ireland, Midlands. And it was Mediterranean weather. It was absolutely, we all just were going around pinching ourselves the entire day. And the day after, actually, it was gorgeous the day after too. We couldn't believe how amazing the weather was. And it was just so brilliant. Everybody was in brilliant form, especially, we haven't had the nicest weather all summer. So it just felt like just such a lovely day for it. And everybody really enjoyed themselves, particularly my brother and my new sister-in-law. And they were beaming all day long. They were just brilliant. They both look fabulous.
Oh, what a stroke of luck. You just cannot tell with our weather in the UK and Ireland. It's so you can't plan anything around weather. So
yeah,
literally what a stroke of luck.
It really was. And it actually reminded me of a story that I often cite when I talk about the topic that we're going to talk about today, which was my own wedding day. And so on my wedding day, Gemma, it rained all day long. Actually, I think it was a bit dry in the morning. But from pretty much the time that I got in the car to go to the church to, the whole afternoon. And again, it was in Ireland. So what do you expect? You pretty much have to expect rain. But it was pretty grim. It was that sideways rain pretty much all day. And we had asked a lot of my husband, who's from London, and I at the time was living in London. So a lot of people had travelled all the way over. So I felt that extra weight of responsibility to showcase the beauty of the Irish countryside. And obviously, the weather didn't play ball. So anyway, I think what was really important for me that day was that I actually did allow myself to have 5 minutes of being quite upset about the weather. So I remember sitting in the wedding car after we got married, and one of the first conversations I had with Dan, my new husband, where we were kind of obviously on a bit of a buzz after having gotten married, and I just said, you know what, you're going to need to give me a few minutes to just be a little bit upset about this weather. And what I don't think I realised at the time was that was actually quite an adaptive strategy, because I then went on and had the best day ever. And so did everyone else, by the way, because what ended up happening was that everybody just got really stuck in. We were all kind of crowded into, we rented a lovely place down in Wicklow, and we all kind of crowded in and got stuck in, shall we say, to the atmosphere. And nobody noticed the weather in reality. Nobody did, of course they did, but actually it didn't really affect the day whatsoever. So, and subsequently I've learned about our topic of the day, which is optimism. We're going to talk a bit about optimism today. And I think we all could do with a bit of optimism in our lives. Would I be right in saying that?
Very, very
I could.
healthy.
And one of my favourite parts and steps, so we'll get into it all, but there are steps that you can take to learn optimism. And one of them is to allow the negative first. Just so it's not denying your reality, And I think there's a lot out there at the moment about toxic positivity. And I think this is the absolute antithesis to that. You'll never get anywhere if you try and deny your reality. So this is not saying that you should be wallowing in all of the misfortune that you encounter and all the adversity that you encounter. It has to be a balance. But I think it is okay. We have to remind ourselves it's okay to kind of spend a few minutes and just go, do you know what, this is really not ideal right now, but then allow for more hopeful thoughts as well. So that's what I did that day, and it's an example that I often use because I think it's probably one that most people can relate to or identify with, because literally as soon as you talk about any wedding, the first question people ask is, oh, but what was the weather like? You know, it seems to be the thing that people want to know about your wedding. So yeah, that's that. It really reminded me of that, and so yeah, let's get into it. What is optimism, Gemma? How do we define it?
Well, it's one of my favourite topics, optimism, and I have come with some information today. So I recently recorded a course on optimism, and I've delved into the research and some of the tips and all of that jazz. So I feel like I'm kind of fairly prepared today, which is quite a nice place for me to be. I'm not always in this place, but I feel like it today. So optimism, really simply, is hopefulness and confidence about future success. So what I love about that definition, first of all, it's really simple. So it's hope and confidence that you're going to create a success of something in the future, or something is going to be a success in the future. And that could be a specific project or a specific part of your life, or it can actually be success in general, i.e. things are going to work out. Like I'll figure out what I need to do when I get to that situation, or I can problem solve, I can adapt, I can learn stuff. So you can either look at it in terms of so very specific, or you can look at it as something general, and the same definition works both ways. What the other thing I like about that definition, I was thinking about it today, is it's not just hope. And I think when we fall into the trap of just being hopeful that something is going to work out for us, or there will be a success of something in the future, we can fall into that trap of blind hope, where we're not necessarily taking any action to make that happen. We're kind of just hoping everything's going to fall into place, and sometimes that works out, but that's a lottery. You know, a lot of time that doesn't work out. You're not really taking any control over that. There's no direction, no agency. So what I like about the confidence part is, you know, I know confidence is a whole different topic, but confidence is, you build confidence by becoming competent at something. So you don't necessarily have confidence when you're, you know, first time you sit on a bike that you can ride it. You by practicing, by learning, by failing, by trying again, you build your confidence over time. And what I like about that definition of confidence is there's action in it. So you have to take some kind of action. So if we take this all right back again to optimism, I like this idea that there's hope. So you're hopeful that things are going to work out. You're going to figure out a way of creating success, or it's going to happen. But you're also confident that's going to happen as well. And to be confident, you have to take action. You have to do something about it. And I love marrying those two together.
Totally agree. That's, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that people maybe don't really understand about optimism, or hadn't really realised about it. The fact that there is that component of our own agency involved. That, you know, people aren't, well, some people probably are born optimists, but mostly actually people probably learn to be optimistic by taking action and doing something and seeing the consequence of their action. And then they learn, okay, actually, that means that I can be optimistic about something else now. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. Love that.
And I love it's not blind hope, and I love it's not toxic positivity. So toxic positivity is more exactly as you were saying just now. You deny how hard things are, or deny challenging parts of a situation, or challenging feelings, or negative things that happening, and just focus on the positive side. Because when we go down that route, you're not allowing yourself to process challenges that you're facing, or difficult emotions, or difficult relationships. You are pretending that everything is great, and actually that's not very healthy or adaptive. And it can be quite a challenging part of society right now, especially in the world of social media, and you know, how things look isn't always how things are. And the reason we call it toxic is because it can actually be quite damaging psychologically. So that we might think we're doing something really good for ourselves by pretending everything's great, I guess kind of a bit of that fake it till you make it. But actually, if you do too much of that, it becomes quite toxic, and that can be damaging for our mental health and leave us in a even worse place. So and I think it's good that we're setting this up at the start, because optimism can get blended into all of those things, blind hope, toxic positivity, just being positive all the time. That is not what we're talking about at all today. But actually, optimism, we know from recent days, so much research around optimism and how positive it is for us in our lives, particularly in the world of positive psychology.
I even start feeling myself getting more optimistic just by reading some of the research. Reminding myself, oh yeah, okay. Even this morning when I was looking at, reminding myself about all the different aspects of optimism, I found myself feeling more optimistic. So it really, it's very, very powerful. It really is. But definitely, the thing about the toxic positivity point is we do have a negativity bias in our brains. It's an evolutionary adaptation where we see things in our environment. We first of all notice the negative before we see the positive, and that's just evolution has taught us to be that way. So if you try to ignore that, it just what happens. Try to ignore the elephant in the room, it just gets bigger. Try to ignore something that's going on in your brain or something that your brain is telling you, it just gets bigger. So instead, what I really like about this is that it says, do you know what? No, it's fine. We can look at this, ideally without judgment, and then move forward. So before we get into it, because there are steps, aren't there, that we can learn and practice to learn optimism. But should we go into that now, or did you say you have some research you want to share?
Yes, I do. And actually, I'm going to consult my notes, which I've never done before on this podcast. I'm very excited about this because there's so much research out there. I just thought, I'm going to delve into this and see where we are in terms of good research, like what optimism actually does for us. And I thought, at least then I can talk through how that actually works or why that might work from a psychology perspective. Because I feel like, in the wild chaos of every day, firstly, we don't have access to research and knowing what actually works or what doesn't work. But secondly, we don't have time to go through it all, like to go through what's out there and, big meta-analysis studies and systematic literaries, all of that jazz. We just don't have time to go through it with a fine-tooth comb, which is basically what we're here for. So I'm happy to do that work and give the highlights. So in terms of why we'd want to think about optimism in our lives, so if people that are more optimistic are more motivated to achieve goals, and that's because they think they can. They're optimistic, they're hopeful, and they have the confidence they can achieve those goals in the future. So, guess what? People that are more motivated to achieve goals are actually going to go out there and make it happen. So they're the ones that are actually going to see more success. It's kind of like this optimism is unlocking potential in the future, because if you believe and you're hopeful, you're confident you're going to create this success, that's going to keep you going when it's tough. It's going to keep you pushing through challenges and keep striving towards that goal rather than giving up.
And it's probably more likely to make you make the right decisions along the way about things that you need to learn, things you need to improve. So it's kind of aligned, I suppose, to a growth mindset as well, isn't it? It's that the belief that you can do it, but also with that belief, the predisposition to take action to make you get there. So it's all this just lovely self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it?
It really is. And to be fair, most topics in a psychology context, we'll talk about kind of the dark side of optimism as well. We are going to get there in this episode today as well, the potential dark side. But a lot of topics in the world of psychology, there are kind of two ways to look at things, or it could be this or it could be that. But I feel like with optimism, there's just so much research, and it just makes so much sense that it's a topic I could talk about all day. So let's have a look at other bits of the research then. So this idea of reaching goals and getting through difficult situations as well, which I think makes total sense. Those that are optimistic are more likely to display better decision-making skills and find ways to overcome obstacles. And I think that's because when we come up against an obstacle, if we are going into it thinking with a pessimistic viewpoint, we might think, oh, this is just too hard. Oh, I'm never going to get past that. I'm never going to be able to push forward. And don't get me wrong, there are times where I feel like that. There are times where and again, there are kind of two ways to look at this part of it as well, in that there are times where I feel like I need to give up because things are too hard, or I haven't quite got the resources at the moment, whether that's energy, whether it's time, whether it's financial resources. There could be times you think, actually, I can't push that right now. And sometimes that's the right decision as well. It doesn't mean we have to do everything. It doesn't mean we have to achieve everything, get past every single obstacle that comes our way. But I also think it gives you some choice as well. And I think this is where the decision making comes in, because if you are making decisions based on what it is you want to achieve, what your big goals are, what's important to you, and you believe that that can happen in the future, you are setting yourself up to make decisions that are going to help you achieve that. So coming back to that achievement part, also from a psychological well-being perspective, that is a nicer place to be as well, to be able to make decisions with that hope in mind rather than feeling defeated or giving up.
I really like the fact that you balance what you're saying with the fact that, you know, sometimes it is okay to just say, do you know what, this is a bridge too far for me right now. I don't have the resources to make this happen. And I think that's also probably a feature of a very healthy optimist, to know when to say, okay, I can feel optimistic about this, but I also can say to myself, but it doesn't have to happen. I don't have to do it. But I definitely think that having the belief about something, and particularly with the aspect of the belief in your own capability that you can do it, leads you to make better decisions along the way. Because, you know, I often think about this in the day-to-day context, because we can think, you know, quite strategically about trying to achieve goals or trying to set up the life that you want. But really, that only ever happens when in the day-to-day chaos of life, you're making those right decisions. And so I think if you're practicing optimism, which we'll get into because there's a few little things that you can do to practice literally on a day-to-day basis. So if you're practicing optimism, there's a direct link, isn't there, between making the right decisions and then reaching the goal that you want, or generally feeling well. Because it doesn't always have to be about achieving goals, does it?
That's part of the research as well. So optimism can positively affect your well-being. So it can make you feel healthier. And that's, you know, that's just not just our opinion. That's part of the research. It's not just looking at performance. Performance is in there. Performance is, you know, a part of optimism because it's about that achieving part. But there's also this huge component, which I would argue is as equally or even more important than performance, is how you feel about yourself and whether you feel that you can direct your future, you can change things, you can achieve things. That's a huge part of psychological well-being. And optimism is a key component of that.
And definitely, because I think the thing is, going back to that point about making the right decision, is that, you know, when I think about the people who I think are healthy optimists, I've noticed what they do is exactly like we said. They are optimists about the things that they're trying to achieve and the things that they're trying to do, but they're also so optimistic in a healthy way that they know when to say no, and that they can be comfortable with that and say, do you know what, I'd rather prioritize my own well-being over pushing myself towards this goal. So that's probably another aspect of why it is correlated with well-being, because, you know, you can say, do you know what, I'm going to say that I'm not going to do this right now because it's not right for me. It's going to push me over the edge. I don't have the resources, but I'm okay because I believe that I still have the capability to do it in the future. And I also believe that it can happen in the future. So,
which is the perfect place to be. Like, I'd love to live my life and you know, I try and do that. But, you know, it's not, I know it's not always possible. And I know sometimes we do have to push ourselves. We talk about this quite a lot throughout this podcast, of the balance of like pushing ourselves and regenerating and recouping and resting and all of that balance as well. And actually, that's another point about optimism. So there's also a little bit of evidence and research around the physical health benefits that are associated with optimism as well. And this is quite new in the research, or there's not tons of this, but we're starting to see kind of indications or pointers in this way. Optimism can affect things like lowering blood pressure, reducing likelihood of rehospitalization after operations, which kind of makes sense maybe because it is that positive frame of mind. and less chance of developing heart disease. Because if we think about stress, for example, the more optimistic you are, you're probably less likely to experience so much stress as well. It can help to reduce that, which obviously is going to have physical benefits for you, not just psychological. But it's a topic I'm really passionate about. I know it's a topic you're really passionate about as well. And I think, but there are tricky bits, why don't we delve into some of the tricky bits of what optimism means or how it can play out. We've talked a little bit about toxic positivity. What about this idea of over-indexing on optimism? So being overly optimistic, is that a thing? How would that...
Oh, I think it definitely is a thing. I've been bitten by this before, where I'm overly optimistic about my own capability, or I'm overly optimistic about something that can happen. And then I realise that actually in reality I didn't have the resources to make it happen, or, it was just too much. And I think that can happen whether it's trying to make a meal for your family or that happens quite a lot in that context, by the way, or, taking on a big project at work. And I think that happens to all of us, doesn't it? Sometimes we just do get, and I think, because day in, day out, our affect changes, doesn't it? And I'm really interested in this idea of affective forecasting, which is basically psychologists speak for being able to predict how you feel based on how you feel now. So if you're in a day where you're feeling good, you've lots of energy, you're more likely to be optimistic about the future, because you're going to be thinking, well, this is how I feel now. Sure, I'll feel like this in 2 weeks' time when I'm going to be delivering that workshop that I've just agreed to. And in reality, in 2 weeks' time, actually, you realise it's in the middle of a very stressful week and something else is happening, and actually you're not feeling quite so positive about things. It happens the other way, by the way, as well, which I tend to experience, which probably affects optimism in the other way, where, when you're not feeling great about yourself, or you're feeling maybe a bit sick or something, and it's very hard to imagine a future where you're feeling better. And, for me, actually, it happens to me in the other way around, where I feel nervous about taking things on when I don't feel well, because I can't imagine a future. And that's totally normal. Again, it's one of our cognitive biases that help us kind of navigate life, but it's a totally normal thing to happen. But it does make navigating all of this stuff much harder.
100%. I mean, this is me down to a T. I take on so many projects.
You do. I'm not gonna lie. I do think of you as someone, but I think when you look at it in the round, as in the grand scheme of things, I think overall it's a really positive trait for you. I think it's worked out really well. Yes. I think, but I can see how sometimes it causes you stress.
100%. And I think this is something I'm still learning about. And the other thing, so before I kind of get into this bit, what I'll say is, we know from research and from the world of positive psychology that optimism is on a scale. So imagine from 0 to 10, for example, and you can go up and down that scale. We generally have a natural level of optimism that, it could be that we're born with it. It could be how we're raised. It could be our experiences. And you wouldn't necessarily think about the scale. You wouldn't necessarily go from like a 2 to a 10 overnight, or ever in life. You also might not want to. You might like kind of where you are. You might just want to be a little bit more optimistic. You might go from like a 4 to a 6, or you might go from like a 6 to a 7, or so you can kind of shift your way around the scale. I think that my natural level of optimism is quite high. So I'm probably generally speaking, at about an 8, I'd say. Yeah. But also I'm picking these figures, there's no test for this. I'm picking these figures out of the sky. I'm telling you, I'm talking about like, this is how I feel I would be.
I think self-report is fine in this one.
I hope so. This bit is not research-based. This is experience-based. But I don't think I was always as optimistic. I think I always had a sense that I don't think I was born thinking, if I want something to happen, I can go and make it happen. I think I kind of learned that over time. We've talked about this in some other podcasts. I was very big into reading biographies and autobiographies and figuring out why people did things or how people did things. And I think that probably rubbed off on me a bit and made me a little bit optimistic in life. And also just experience, like going and doing stuff and making stuff happen. So I think through kind of proving that I can want something to happen in the future, whether it be, you know, a qualification or a type of work life or somewhere I'm living, or I feel like I can look back over time and think, oh, actually, you can make those things, that people can make those things happen. I think I've kind of internalized that for myself, which I think is a really positive thing. However, I do think sometimes it is my downfall, because I also have this idea that, yeah, I can achieve that. Someone would say something, I'm like, great idea. You know, think about, we've talked about this example before, when we went to Athens, you know, came back late that night from being in Athens working. And the next morning I was going away with the family to France on the Eurostar with the dog. I've never travelled to France before in a car with my family. I've never been on the Eurostar in a car before. I've never taken the dog abroad before. I don't really know France at all. The weather wasn't great, so there was lots of like weird packing. You know, to be honest, I had no clue what I was doing. It's always stressful, that kind of holiday for the first time. And I thought, I'm like, why did I think I could go from quite fun, but also sometimes, you know, a little bit intense work trip as well. We were doing something, the other thing I'll say is we were doing something completely new when we were in Athens as well. So it's a little bit, I wouldn't say it was stressful, but there was a moment in time there where it was hard. The actual filming, we were filming outside in front of we wanted the Acropolis in the background, and it was windy. We worried about sound. We had cleaners kind of milling around the background. We had a time frame. We were trying to speed through this stuff. We didn't know the film crew, who were great, but you know, there's all this stuff. There's 3 of us filming. We've written our scripts in different ways. We had to do B-roll stuff. Anyway, it was really good fun. But what I'll say is, we didn't know what we were doing, so it was a lot of uncertainty there. And then I came straight back the next day when it's a whole host of other uncertainty. Had to, you know, be in the car, be on the road, got to get there, got to be on the shuttle. Like, how does it work getting the dog through customs, and you know, all of that kind of jazz. So I think times like that, and it all works out very well. It's lovely. It works really well. But I do think times like that, I look back and I'm like, actually, I think sometimes being over optimistic, that can be my downfall at times. So the question, how do I deal with that? Becoming aware of it. You know, a lot of what we talk about is awareness. None of us are perfect. We've all, and also the stuff that makes us really great as individuals, our strengths, the stuff that makes us who we are and makes us good at the things that we can do that other people can't always do, or, you know, the things that make us different and special and enjoy life. Also, if we over-index on them, if we do them too much, they can actually become a bit of a derailer. And for me, that's probably something that can be a bit of a derailer for me. So the way that I deal with it is, firstly, being aware. I'm a little bit more mindful, taking on projects or fun things even. Saying that, this will make you laugh. On Saturday, we're driving to France. So it's one of our little girls' birthdays. So we're going to France on Saturday. So we're going into Paris. They really want to go to Paris, the girls. So we're going to Paris for a day, and we're going to Euro Disney for 3 days. I'm back for a day, and then I fly to Jersey for the weekend. So actually, as I taught them, that's fun.
Have you learned anything?
Have I learned anything? Well, do you know what I have learned? There's a day in between this time. That's what I'll say. And then yesterday I was booking a meeting. And so I was like, can you do a meeting on this day? And I was like, actually, I think I can, because it's like half an hour call. And I think, then I feel like I've done work for a day. So I haven't had to take a whole day off. I haven't taken a whole week off work. And I could try and pack some stuff in between. So, I don't know. I guess the answer is I'm always going to be a bit like that. But then equally, I do often make things happen as well. And I can sometimes work quickly and get things done. But sometimes it causes stress as well. Like, you know, if I think about really stressful periods of time.
Actually, maybe being overly optimistic for you sometimes is okay, because you have that higher tolerance for discomfort, and you can ride the storm, and that's fine. I suppose, where then really just tips over the edge is where you're finding yourself maybe going into burnout mode, or you know, just really feeling overwhelmed. So again,
it's a fine balance
to self-awareness, doesn't it?
Do you ever go down the overly optimistic route, or do you have it the other way, where you're saying like that effective part where you can't imagine feeling better in the future?
I am a total enigma, because I literally On so many levels, Gemma.
I've never heard someone describe themselves as an enigma. I'm loving this.
Let me explain. Sometimes I am a massive optimist, and other times I'm the complete opposite. I don't think I'm ever really a pessimist, but sometimes I think I fall into the trap of learned helplessness, which is a sort of another prong of the opposite of optimism. So obviously we think about optimism and then we think about pessimism as being polar opposites of one another. There's another aspect which is called learned helplessness, which it was a term coined by Martin Seligman, we now know him to be the father of positive psychology, but actually way back in his career, he studied learned helplessness a lot more and the link to depression. And so basically learned helplessness is the belief that we cannot affect change in our future in any way, shape or form. And so I know that sometimes I recognize in myself that sometimes I fall into that trap where I'm looking at something and I'm just going, oh no, I couldn't possibly do that. Oh no. And it really depends on whatever day you get me. It might be to do with how much sleep I've had the night before, to be fair. So actually maybe there's no enigma in it at all. Maybe it's just, count the number of hours of sleep I've had and the quality of sleep I've had, and then it'll correlate directly to how optimistic I'm feeling. But yes, I definitely do fall into the trap of taking on too much sometimes, because I think to myself, yeah, I can do that. No problem. That'll happen. No problem. That'll be great. I'm delighted. And I'm feeling really excited about it. And then I find myself in a situation where I'm juggling too many balls at once and, realize, oh gosh, no, I can't do it all. So, I think we're all in that boat. And I think anybody who is juggling life in general at the moment,
anything,
I think the Athens example is a really good one, because I would never have done that had it not been for you and Tatiana suggesting it and saying, come on, we can do it. Because I just wouldn't have had probably maybe the confidence in myself or the confidence that it could happen. So I think that's a really good example of where it's why probably we're good friends and why we have a good working relationships, because we can balance that out in each other. And I think that's actually maybe an interesting thing to explore in terms of a tip, because if you recognize in yourself that you're maybe overly optimistic, or if you recognize in yourself that you probably veer more towards the learned helplessness side of things or the pessimistic side of things, find somebody to buddy up with, because actually that can really help. And you can see it in relationships, whether it's partners, you see it in friendships, you see it in good working relationships. And it's really healthy to learn and to lean on other people who might have a different kind of natural inclination for optimism than you. So I think that's probably a good thing to remember, isn't it?
I think that's a great tip. I think kind of surrounding yourself with different kinds of people that are doing different things, on this scale of optimism, I think is a really, really great tip. Let's think about some tips then, how people can actually apply.
Yeah, what else can we do?
Lives. Well, I've got a very key tip, I guess, that comes out of positive psychology, but I have to literally work through it as I say it. So bear with me, because I have to get the kind of words right. And this comes from, so you mentioned Martin Seligman, who is the father/godfather of positive psychology. And actually, he's got a really interesting story in that, as you said, he was doing a lot of research around this idea of learned helplessness. So feeling that we can't control what comes next. And there's a huge link with that and depression, as you were saying, Erin. And then he became the president of the American Psychology Association, APA, in the US. And he, I think it was kind of just before around that time, he started to think, hang on a sec. In the world of psychology, we focus a lot on what's wrong with people. We've got this big diagnostic manual with all these different things that can be wrong with us psychology-wise. And that's kind of how it was looked at. I don't think it's necessary. I think that's changing. We're looking at variations of psychology now, or the way brains work. But, traditionally it was looked at a diagnostic, like something's wrong. And he had this idea of like, hang on, we're so focused on what's wrong with us. Why are we not thinking about what's right with us? Why are we not thinking about what's going well with our brains, the way we think, our psychology? And that was the birth. Exactly. Use it to our advantage. And that was the birth of positive psychology. And actually, I remember, because Erin and I did our masters together in occupational psychology. And I remember there being a module on positive psychology. Actually, I remember 2 modules, positive psychology and coaching. And both of them, I was like, oh, what a load of rubbish. I don't want to go to either of those. But I'm going to have to do it because I have to do it to like pass the course. And lo and behold, they were both amazing. I became a coaching psychologist and I use positive psychology every day with my clients. So there's a lesson in life. Like, give it a go.
But positive psychology at that time was really quite new. I mean, Martin Seligman started writing about it in the 90s, but really even still in the 2000s, which is when we did our masters, it was still not widely used, especially not the way it is now. So it was we were probably still only learning about some early research, really. Whereas now we know so much more about it.
So the whole thing with positive psychology is, okay, what's good about us? What can we lean on? What can we use? So things like strengths, we do a lot of work talking about like strengths, what makes us individual? How can we use that to our advantage? Optimism is in there. And it's actually he's got some great books. So he's got Learned Helplessness, Authentic Happiness, which I love. I refer back to that quite a lot, actually. And this tip I'm going to give you is the 3 Ps. And this comes from Martin Seligman and it's in both those books, I believe. And it's based on research. So what he found from his research centres, he has done tons of research in this area. And the 3 Ps, I have to look at this to remind myself because I get so tongue-tied.
It's a bit of a tongue twister. Yeah,
it is. Memory is not one of my strengths. I can tell you that. You're better off having me seeing these words in front of me and talking it through than trying to remember it. Personalisation, pervasiveness and permanence. So let me explain what they are. The personalisation bit is when something is going well, an optimist will find their role in that and make that personally about something they've done. A pessimist might think, oh, it's luck. And on the flip side, when it's a challenge you're facing. Pervasiveness. Now, this is to do with in what context. So if an optimist has a really bad experience, say that they really mess up. I have done this. I'll tell this story another time, but like really sending something out to lots of people at work that you shouldn't have sent out.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we've all done that.
I had a horrible experience of that, and I will share that one day.
I can feel it right now.
Terrifying. Yeah. Oh my God. I kind of want to tell the story, but I'm like, no, keep going, Joe, because we need to keep this tight to this optimism topic. So pervasiveness, an optimist would think, okay, I really, really messed up in that situation. Whereas an optimist might think, oh, I messed up everything. So it's about context. Yeah. Is it about that one context or is it about the context in general? And permanence is about always. Or an optimist might think, okay, I messed up sending that spreadsheet out on that occasion. I'm not going to do that again tomorrow. Whereas a pessimist might think, I always do that. It's always me. It's always me that mess up. Don't get me wrong, I do say that about myself all the time. I'm like, oh, it's always me. But I am actually joking when I say that. So my advice, my tip here is to think about where you sit in these categories. So personalization, do you take credit when things go well? Or do you take it personally when things don't go well? So think about that personalization. Pervasiveness. So in what context? Are you able to say, oh, I really messed up at work, but you know what? I did a great job at home with the kids today. Or I did a great job caring for someone or connecting with my friend. And permanence is about forever, always, never, like those words when things don't go well. And that really is, at this stage, is about building self-awareness around those things. Where do you sit?
And actually, that's such good advice because, you can think about this model and learn it and find it interesting, but actually use it literally when you're in the middle of, stop yourself. And this goes back to conversations we had around mindfulness and checking in and how important it is to do that several times during the day. Because when you do stop yourself and notice what's going on and what you're telling yourself, you can apply these 3 Ps, put it on a post-it note and stick it on your wall. Apply these 3 Ps and go, right, what are my beliefs around this situation? And I think if you go through them all and realize, oh, hold on a second, actually, this really wasn't to do with me. And actually, this isn't about everything that I do. This is only just one situation. And also, this is not going to last forever. Then, it's a great way to kind of just recalibrate a little bit. And it's not necessarily telling yourself that your thoughts are wrong or beliefs are wrong, but it's just really about kind of allowing a more balanced view into the equation. Because like we said earlier, the brain is there making all sorts of probably very much incorrect assumptions about everything that goes on all day, every day. It's trying to make predictions about what's happening next. It's trying to make judgments on what's happening. It's trying to make judgments on ourselves. It's trying to basically survive. And along the lines of surviving and in the process of surviving, it's probably making quite a lot of not necessarily accurate judgments on what's actually happening. So that's why it's so important to just stop and take that breath and just apply that filter to what you're thinking. So I think that's really brilliant. Yeah. So the 3 Ps, definitely write it down though, because nobody's remembering those 3 Ps.
I feel like I need to come up with an alternative, not necessarily Ps, but just, kind of break it down. Have you got any advice? What would you say in terms of building optimism?
I think that's brilliant. And then I think what the next step would be, and this probably does come from, so Seligman draws on the work of Albert Ellis, who was the creator of the cognitive behavioral therapy, I think, which most people probably are aware of. And in cognitive behavioral therapy, it is a lot about, going through processes to stop and notice your thoughts and beliefs, and then and replacing them with more positive ones, or replacing them with more realistic judgments on what's going on. So I think then it's about spending time allowing for more positive thoughts or more positive beliefs. So, again, going back to that idea of, I kind of, the way I like to talk about it when I'm talking about optimism is it's like those negative thoughts and those negative judgments have a residency in your brain. So they're just there, they're set up like Elton John in Vegas. They're there for years. And they're not going anywhere. You have got to make sure that you bring on a new act with positive thoughts. So, and that can be, whether it's doing a bit of gratitude journaling, just allowing yourself to think something that you're grateful for, or allowing yourself just a little moment of joy, because that's okay. In the wild chaos of everyday life, that's one thing we're always saying, isn't it? Don't forget your little moments that you enjoy in the day to day. And, or as you said earlier, don't forget, review your strengths and think about what your strengths are, because that's such an important one to remind ourselves on. Yes, okay, you might have sent the spreadsheet out and that was totally cringe, but actually you have loads of strengths, and don't forget about those. So I think just allowing yourself that moment of positivity, and it's not saying, this is absolutely not about toxic positivity, because if you do these steps, the steps are, allow the negative, do spend those few minutes going, this situation is not ideal. And then the next one is about, bringing in the 3 Ps. And then the next one is about bringing in a bit of positive. That is not toxic positivity. That is definitely, a healthy way of approaching a potentially unfavorable situation and allowing yourself to think more favorably about the future with more hope and with more belief in your own capability.
Yeah, I agree. That's such great advice. And I think it's so important, because we talk a lot about a balanced way of doing things, a healthy way of doing things. And sometimes I feel like there's so much clickbait out there. There's protocols and you do this and you do that and your mindset's fixed and you change it. We don't always have to change our mindset. That's not always what this is about. Sometimes we just need to add something else in and accept that, of course, we've got challenges going on. Of course, we sometimes have negative thoughts, or maybe a lot of the time we have that. We all have those Elton John residencies in our head. But exactly as you say, I love this idea of, and we don't necessarily want to take that away, because that is part of it. Also, we can't take it away necessarily, but what we can do is we can add a little bit more of something else, i.e. positivity, just to bring the balance up a little bit. And it's not that we need to shoot ahead with positivity, that toxic or over the top. It's just that we just need to get a bit more balance in sometimes, so that we can, feel better and perform better and connect with others better as well. And I love that piece of advice. And it's the kind of psychology tip that works for me, and I think it works for a lot of people. And it's not a quick fix. It's not it's not kind of a quick click. This is the one thing you need to do every day, or the 3 things you need to do. We're never going to give that kind of advice, because this stuff is so nuanced and it's so personal, and there's so much learning involved as well. And I think we have got to be gentle with ourselves as well. A lot of us are trying to get through tricky times or navigate the wild chaos of every day. And I love that advice. I love it, like just changing the balance. It's not about replacing. It's just about getting a bit more balance in.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of, there's a bit of a build on cognitive behavioural therapy, then kind of next wave of therapy, which is called ACT, which we'll talk about another time. I won't go into the details of that. But in that, it kind of even says, go beyond what they advise in cognitive behavioural therapy, which is often to kind of challenge thoughts and try and change your thoughts. In this wave of therapy, what they say is, you don't need to change your thoughts, because actually that's almost a judgment in itself, isn't it? It's almost sort of saying, oh, your thoughts are bad. Well, actually, no, that's not helpful, because I don't want to start going around believing my thoughts are bad. They're not bad. The analogy that they use in that, which I think is really helpful, is think of your thoughts like passengers on a bus, and you're just watching it. You're just watching it go by, or clouds going by in the sky. You're just watching these thoughts. You don't have to put a judgment on them. And there's nothing wrong with whether, if you're having a negative thought about something, that's fine. But allow yourself to that moment of mindfulness to step back from them and separate yourself from that thought. And that allows you then to make a better judgment about what to do next. So again, and I think that's really helpful and kind of an adaptive way of approaching these difficult situations. But Gemma, can I just say also, despite the fact that we know all these things, I don't do this well all the time. There's definitely days where I get myself into a right hole of learned helplessness. And to be fair to us, I would just to add, and maybe we should probably finish up, because I know we could talk about this forever and ever and ever. Such a fascinating topic. But to be fair to us, if you think about what we've just been through globally, a global pandemic, and if you think about, what we're being exposed to on a daily basis in the news cycle right now, it's very hard not to feel that sense of learned helplessness, because we were literally told during the pandemic for how many years not to leave our houses. So our sense of autonomy and agency was actually taken away. So actually we did have a couple of years of being almost like in one of Seligman's experiments, which by the way, back in the 70s was totally unethical. But anyway, we'll talk about that again. It was almost like, I think we should have a whole podcast about unethical psychology experiments that happened. But end it in how psychology has moved on now and is much better.
But we know better now.
Oh, we know a lot better now. But anyway, yeah. But it was almost a bit like an experiment in learned helplessness, because literally that agency was taken away from us, and you don't just get over that overnight. It can be very hard to rebuild that sense of I can take control over what's going on in my life and get back into it. So we did have that, and also it can feel very hard at the moment, particularly to look at what's going on in the news and feel like you really want to do something about it, but we do all feel powerless. So it's totally normal to feel a sense of learned helplessness. So what we're also not saying here is, if you feel like that, there's something wrong with you. That's not what we're saying at all. In fact, it's totally normal to feel that way. But perhaps just try and do what we have suggested if you feel like you have the energy to do it. There are some days where you don't feel like you have the energy to even try and do anything, and that's absolutely fine too. But if you feel like you can do it, then those are little tips and steps that you can take to maybe shift those beliefs in your own mind, which will help your overall outlook for the future. So, yeah. Does that feel like a good place to end? I think it might.
I think it does. And I think we should probably say at this point, if there's any topics that anyone's interested in, please let us know, because we're keen to explore any kind of psychology, either any kind of psychology or anything to do with the wild chaos of everyday life. So, common challenges we face or things we're juggling. Yep. And the email address is hello@psychologyinthewild.com. And whilst we're on that note, if you have enjoyed this, we would love it if you would follow and rate this podcast wherever you're listening to it. And please feel free to share it with other people who might find this interesting as well. And I'll actually just finish on a story from Martin Seligman. It's very short.
Go on.
I have another podcast that is an interview style podcast. So I'm interviewing kind of researchers or people who have done lots of stuff with mindset, or, I've experienced this mindset shift, or they've researched it. And the person that books people for the podcast got in touch with Martin Seligman and said, "Hi, Martin. Any chance you'd want to do this podcast? What it's about, and it's of charity. It's all linked to a charity and all this kind of jazz." And he literally wrote back, "No, thanks."
Oh, dear.
I know. And it wasn't
in Martin.
No, I think it was, I didn't take it. I'm sure can you imagine how many blimmin', and I've never heard him on anything. I've never heard him on any podcasts. I don't see him in interviews. He's, I don't know how old he is now. Like, I don't know what he's doing. So I wasn't offended at all. And actually, it's what I've realised in that part of trying to get guests to a podcast is actually, you kind of get to the point where you appreciate any response, because so many people don't respond at all.
I was just going to say, do you know what? It was very polite of him to respond at all, because I'm sure lots of people don't. So
no thanks. So I can confirm he's still alive. But yeah, he's just not interested in chatting to me. So shall we leave it there?
Yeah, not yet, Gemma. Not yet.
Not yet. There's my growth mindset. Not yet.
Yes, not yet. All right. Well, listen, have a great week and stay safe in the wild.